But, of course, the way he dealt with Islam has enraged some people who got used to the Bush years.
Yeah. Well, when he was in Cairo, he was making these references to the mirage of the Prophet and all this stuff in his speech. It was quite.
When he said all the three prophets stood in the heavens and prayed together.
And I thought, wow, who would have thought,
that was pretty smart.
That something like that would happen. And the way he used it in such a universal way to show this, pull out this Islamic tradition of kind of unity and.
I didn't think I did not accurately predict the excitement over his speech because people went wild in Egypt.
Yes.
Oh, they were people. The Egyptian jokes saying that. If Mubarak will not allow democracy in Egypt, because if he does, they'll elect Obama.
Yeah.
It's quite true.
And his speech was not. It's not as if he was very compromising in some ways. He got up in front of the Muslim world and said, the U.S. will continue to support the state of Israel. This is not. It's not as if he budged that.
He even said the bond between the United States and Israel is unbreakable. It's quite strong.
Addressing Muslims, but he addressed Muslims with respect. In a certain way that you don't see very knowledge of who they are, and people will overlook, I think, unbreakable bonds with Israel for a little bit more respect than they have for the past 8 years.
That's what It's. I think something as simple as this notion of dignity and respect doesn't get enough analysis especially in the minds of these talking heads, But the incident that I want to tell you about, about standards of discourse about standards of discourse and creating creating bars for what is acceptable in a public arena when you talk about a subject. The New York Times, one of the editors of the New York Times contacted me. They had an op-ed written by an Israeli professor, I think. I think he was a professor, who basically, this was before Obama was elected president, and what he said is that Obama should not, it's very, very dangerous for Obama to be elected because according to Islamic law, Obama is an apostate. And Muslims, according to the Sharia, according to Islamic law, are duty bound to kill an apostate. And so if Obama is elected and he goes to visit a Muslim country, it is a sure thing that he will be assassinated as an apostate. Okay? So this op-ed was accepted for publication in the New York Times. Then, and it was actually printed. Then one of the editors called me, and he said that he has a disagreement with his editorial board because he thought that before they should publish this article, they should have consulted an expert in Islamic law. Because he said everyone in the accepted that idea that Obama is an apostate and that an apostate would be killed, and etc., and that therefore this is a respectable opinion, and he wanted to know if he's correct in that it is a more complicated issue than that in Islamic law, right? And and he asked for a written. He asked for my response in writing, which I did. And one of the points that I made, I drew examples of in New York Times and Washington Post and LA Times, op-eds or articles that in one way or another touched upon other legal systems than the American system. So, I did Lexis and Nexus searches in Westlaw and so on. And so whether it's Israeli law or Jewish law or canon law or references to European law or South American legal systems, whether Mexican law or Argentinian law or so on. And I gave the editor a chart that in every single one of these times where an article was published, a legal expert was always referenced. A legal expert from the tradition. So for instance, in Jewish law, it is always a respected authority in Jewish law. But in most times when Islamic law has been referenced in op-eds or articles, no authority on Islamic law is referenced or consulted. There might be, a historian might be consulted, or a political scientist might be consulted, but not a specialist in law. And to his credit, I mean, he said that this to him was eye-opening because it was something that he just never thought of, and it was just ongoing. But at the same time, he told me that the editor-in-chief would not adopt a policy that from now on, before we publish anything about Islamic law, let's get an Islamic law expert's opinion as to whether this is respectable or not. So at the end, my memo didn't produce a change in policy, but at least for this editor, it was, so it's quite interesting. But an example, you get published in the New York Times saying, those Muslims are going to kill Obama if he's elected. And I don't think that any editor in the New York Times now feels compelled to go back and, for instance, apologize for having, So anyway, I picked up this book fairly. It talks about Europe and the revolution in Europe, i.e. the Muslim presence in Europe, and that's what it means by revolution. And a subtitle of the book is "Can Europe be the same with different people in it?" And the different people being, of course, Muslim, right? And you can probably, just from the title, predict what his conclusion is, right? The answer is no. But some of the particular claims that he makes are worth discussing. So, first, I'm going to go through all three quotes and then let's talk about them. It says, under a subheading of Islam as a hyper-identity, it says, quote, Islam has ever been understood as a mighty identity, shaping every aspect of a believer's life and reducing lesser allegiances to unimportance. Ernest Renan, the famous scholar or Orientalist, wrote in 1883 that certain habits inculcated by the Muslim faith are so strong that all differences of race and nationality disappear before the fact of conversion to Islam. The Berber, the Sudanese, the Circassian, the Malay, the Egyptian, the Nubian, once they have become Muslim, are no longer Berbers, Sudanese, Egyptians, etc. They are Muslims. This indeed is the view not just of Islam's detractors, but of its adherents, especially when they are trying to present Islam as a source of brotherhood that can serve as an antidote to Western racism or nationalism. Then, elsewhere, he says, if we return to Huntington's observation about the frictions between Islam and every single culture with which it is in contact, or if we consider the pecuniary servitude, violence, and mediocrity, if we consider the pecuniary servitude, violence, and mediocrity of Muslim societies worldwide, how do we explain it? Either there is a major problem with Islam that must be addressed by Muslims themselves, or a wide variety of non-Muslim cultures has, by incredible coincidence, developed exactly the same unfair malevolence towards Islam. Naturally, this last is attractive to activist immigrants and their defenders. It is what they are referring to when they speak of Islamophobia. Finally, the last quote. He now is trying to get more particular about the Muslim identity and its particulars. So he says, so he talks about how some Muslims have assimilated, and how there are some very famous Muslim musicians or athletes and so on. But then he says, but there are differences. Most European Muslims are not of Palestinian ancestry at all, and agitating on behalf of the old Sod, a specific geographical space far away, is not the same as agitation on behalf of the Ummah, the abstract community of the Muslim faith whose laws are binding on Muslims whenever they may be. IRA fundraising has no effect on the political life of the United States, except, one hopes, to trouble its conscience. The Ummah, however, does have claims over Europe and not just the Middle East. 2 million Muslims live in the UK, notes British historian David Sisrani, and one thing that unites this diverse population is hostility towards Israel and its diaspora champions. Okay? Very typical argument that is heard all over Europe today, right? The elements of the argument, we can recap them, is the power of the Muslim identity, single Muslim identity all over, and the overbearing in many ways a presence of the Ummah, which the allegiances of Muslims go to, and that the nutshell of it is that despite all appearances to the contrary of assimilation or otherwise, Islam has, when Islam occupies the space, it cannot share that space with anything else. And that is why Muslims will forever be Muslims, and regardless of individual cases of assimilation, as he talks about, that he discusses, the space that is occupied by Islam is so overwhelming that the matter is... So the conclusion of his book is that eventually what Muslims are going to do is they're going to turn Europe as part of the Muslim Ummah. And then, like Hizb ut-Tahrir used to have a magazine called California. They were persuaded for a while that California is going to be the place of the next Khilafah. So, they had this... I don't think it's printed anymore, but but of course it's excellent material for people of this view to cite as examples of all right. Let's. At the risk of being too simplistic, but let's talk about this basic worldview. First, the first question that obviously raises is, does it describe an accurate state of affairs? Is the Islamic identity so powerfully dominant? And if you remember, we talked yesterday about Bernard Lewis and Huntington and so on, and one of the things that this whole discussion raises is, we know of, for instance, Muslims in India today who are very much Indian, and very much, and in fact, in wars between Pakistan and India, clearly sided with the Indian side, right? We also know from our experience in the Iraq War that Saudi Muslims, fought with Americans against Iraqi Muslims. And of course, we know of the Iraq-Iran war, but often explained away by Shia-Sunni divide, which is actually doesn't really answer the question, because many of those who did fight, of course, were Shia Iraqis and so on. But these examples do not seem in the mind of this classic argument to be of any significance. The presence, because they say, well, look at Filipino Muslims and their clashes with the party in which they're in. Look at the Muslim separatists in China, etc., etc. You get the drift. The Huntington thesis of Islam's bloody borders, if you remember, he says, Islam has bloody borders. All right, well, so what's right or what is wrong either about the points that Caldwell makes?
it's in my consideration, he makes serious simplification in defining Muslim identity. And yeah, of course, he shares some truth that the idea of Ummah is what we can call globalized community, global community. But at the same time, he ignored the fact that Muslim society is not one but diverse. And it seems to me, Islamic identity, even in Europe and United States, has to be negotiated with the dominant culture. And as far as I'm concerned, there are some effort from Muslim community to negotiate with the dominant culture. And it's not simply talk about the global Ummah and try to conquer to change the dominant culture with the Islamic one.
I mean, I want. Where is this global ummah?
This is concept of brotherhood. It's the theological.
Theological brotherhood. I mean, the tradition of the Prophet that Muslims ought to feel for each other. The Quranic verse that you are one people. But what is different from the idea of ummah? How do I phrase this? There has been other collective identities in history, right? Like, take a very simple one, Christendom, the notion of Christendom, or the very notion of the West, which is interesting because it has shifting borders. I mean, till recently, countries that were part of Eastern Europe are now a part of the West. Then we have places like New Zealand or Australia that are part of the West, Canada, the US, part of the West. And what is Israel? Part of the West, not part of the West?
Part of Europe.
Well, of course, I mean, for him, Turkey wouldn't be a part of the West. I mean, that would be.
And he's probably never been there. That's the feeling. I have to say, as somebody who has not traveled a lot in the Muslim world, but more than a lot of Western people, I think, this is the feeling I always get. These people have not been to the Islamic world, or haven't really spent time embedded in Muslim communities. I mean, the idea that, take Turkey as an example. You know, Turks spent quite a few centuries subjecting other Muslims to their colonial rule, very much considered Arabs, for example, to be inferior to them. And over a wide expanse of territory and a long period of time. That doesn't appear at all in this film.
And of course,
and it's a big exception.
The part of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the end of the threat of the Ottoman Empire to Europe was the Arab rebellions or the Arab revolts, which were massive and extremely. But what its history would seem to problematize simplified interpretations. But what I think is worth looking into is why is it that it seems like history makes no impact on these views? We know that the concept of jihad, for instance, which is supposed to be this very powerful, dynamic force, etc., etc. Well, if you compare the effectiveness of the idea of jihad to the effectiveness of the idea of holy war during the various crusades, I am sorry, holy war wins by leagues. I mean, Muslims didn't get their act together in their jihads to defend themselves against the crusader invasions most of the time. But that it doesn't translate into any understanding of the role of even a militaristic notion of jihad. When we come to an idea of this notion of the Muslim allegiance to a supra-identity of an ummah, you're absolutely right. Not only there are numerous dynasties that existed in Islamic history, but even the Muslim World League today can't. What policies have they managed to be unified about? Can anyone name anything they've managed to attain unity on? I mean, practically, actually, what troubles me as a jurist and a theologian is why is it that the notion of the European Union seems to attract more allegiance than the idea of the Ummah? And frankly, as a Muslim, I would like the Ummah to have more traction than the notion of we all belong to Europe, because, it seems to at least be more coherent. But the historical facts on the ground is it's not. But here's the troubling part. Do you know that a huge part of the discourses of the programs against Jews and the pre-Holocaust period, and do this as an experiment yourself. I mean, don't take my word for it. Go back and read a lot of the literature that was coming out at the time about Jewish character. Mm-hmm. Invariably, it always spoke about the inability of the Jew to be a true German because of their allegiance to sometimes it's halakha, sometimes it's to some notion of the Holy Land, but basically it's the fundamental, the argument would go, inability of the Jew to truly assimilate and to truly be loyal, right? And we all know where that took us. But in all of the literature that I've seen by people like this, that type of comparison doesn't seem to have any traction for them, or to be at all. If they acknowledge it, they'll say, "Well, no, but it's different because Muslims had a civilization, and they all yearn to have their civilization back." What? Is it just simply ignorance and that's all?
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, often I hear things which I think come out of a lot of fear, and they take a sliver of truth and expand it in a kind of a strange direction. As in some of these examples, and the examples you gave about the Jewish community, that because it has a diaspora, and one time I was I was doing my MA in religion at SOAS when the Danish cartoons came out. It was an interesting place to be as a school, at that time. And not a whole lot actually happened in terms of discussion, but I do remember in one class